It's high time I gave you another bulletin from the Biel tournament taking place at the moment. And I've got a very exciting game to show you. Erdogmus is the youngest player to crash through the 2700 barrier. Before that, he was the youngest player to break through the 2600 barrier. And before that, he became the world's youngest grandmaster. At least for a couple of years, he held that record. He gets coaching from Shahriar Mamedyarov, former number 2 in the world. And his coach in Biel is Eltaj Safali, also from Azerbaijan. Of course, Erdogmus is Turkish. So he has great support. And in fact, he homeschools. So he's really dedicated to chess. But so far in Biel, he's had pretty mixed results in the rapid section. They're playing a triathlon event with Blitz Rapid and Classical. And the rapid, well, he played poorly. And so far in the Classical, he's had 4 draws and they're pretty mixed. He survived a couple of scares. I watched his game against Matthias Bluebaum and boy oh boy, his nerves were all over the place. He was in time pressure. He was sort of bouncing up and down in his chair. He was drumming his fingers on the table. I mean, if I were playing against him, I would consider complaining. Or maybe I would just think, well, carry on. You know, you're clearly going to self-destruct. But anyway, you know, he's very young. Maybe he'll grow out of that. Anyway, let's take a look at this round 5 game. He's playing white against Jose Martinez from Mexico, who had a really superb World Cup in the autumn. That was a real breakout event for him. So, you know, he's a serious player. Okay. Without further ado, Erdogmus against Martinez. E4 from the Turkish prodigy. And it's a gioco piano. And all the pieces stay on the board for a long time. It really was a kind of gentle start. Now, if black castles, then bishop g5. And this is a bit problematic, breaking that pin. So h6. I mean, there are many ways for both sides to play this position. But h6, in this case, I understand this little pawn move, because actually the pin is annoying. And h3, there we go. That prevents a knight g4 or sometimes a bishop g4. And black decides to swing this knight over to g6. So standard stuff from Martinez. So the knight still covers e5, but perhaps looks at f4, and well, white's knight reaches g3, and we've got a virtually symmetrical position. The only difference is that the rook is on e1, so that's white's extra tempo. Now, black decides to break in the middle with d5. I mean, normally the first side to get this break in is normally doing pretty well, but it's complicated. First thing is, we should note that it's not possible for white to take this, or it's inadvisable anyway, because of bishop f2 check. And then queen f6, picking up the rook. So this is what happened, but instead of taking on e5, Erdogmus played d4. So he gets this break in as well, which means that the rook is nicely placed on the open file. I mean, dozens of games have been played in this variation. So they're still on known territory, actually. So black has to think, how do you bring these pieces into play? I mean, white has the same problem. It would be nice to bring the queen into play, but then you have to think, well, do you want to really give yourself an IQP? I mean, white is very stable there. I mean, that's playable for black. But, you know, white can play in this position. You know, if you can exchange bishops, that would be certainly significant for white. Could give white the advantage. But Martinez plays bishop e6, which has been seen before. It looks very odd, but the point is, I mean, when I say it looks odd, normally, white would leap at the chance to take that bishop with the knight. But in this case, you can see rook and bishop are pointing at f2, and that gives counterplay, serious counterplay. So instead, after quite a long think, Erdogmus played bishop c2. Now, he thought for 17 minutes here. I suspect he knew this was still a theoretical position. I suspect he'd looked at this some time ago and was just trying to work his way into the position, just to remind himself of the themes. So this bishop is pointing at the king side. Knight f4. So, okay, obviously a nice square. And shuts out that bishop because, sometimes there are issues with bishop h6 and maybe, white's queen getting in. Now, there have been a few games that have arrived at this point, and, well, for example, this was played in one game, or a couple of games actually. Wei Yi played like this, and then rook e1. This is a symbolic advantage for white because of the two bishops, but actually it's very hard to make anything of this position when it's so symmetrical. Black doesn't have any weaknesses at all, and indeed that game ended in a draw. But Erdogmus thought for a very long time here. I mentioned his time pressure earlier. He thought for 37 minutes here. Incredible. And played rook e4. So, it looks like a slightly odd move to block the bishop, but it puts pressure on the knight. And who knows, that rook might even swing to the king side. But there's pressure anyway. And if the knight retreats, then white wins material. Martinez played queen f6 to support the knight. Now queen f3 with more pressure. And this is an absolutely critical position. And Martinez thought for 1 minute, but, well, he'd had a bit of a think that on the turn before over queen f6. He played bishop c7. In fact, the best move is to play bishop takes knight. So if, let's say, rook takes, then knight takes pawn check, and there's a problem there. And it leads to wild complications after this, and g4, and then you can go for a kingside attack. The computer says this is equal, but there are kind of only moves on both sides. There are long, complex variations, very, very sharp. Martinez sort of wanted to try to keep a lid on things with bishop c7. So all these pieces are protecting the knight. But maybe it was too late to keep a lid on things. Okay, I think I'm going to have a drink. I think you should have a think. White play, what would you do in this position? Erdogmus found a very clear and very convincing way to play for white. White play, cheers. Do you want to improve your chess? Get access to live masterclasses with yours truly? Then subscribe to patreon.com/PowerPlayChess, and for just $25 a month, you get a newsletter with a test game, calculation puzzles, a monthly opening survey, access to an archive with over 100 opening surveys. And you can join in live masterclasses exclusive to patrons where you can ask me questions directly over Zoom. All for only $25 per month. Do subscribe to patreon.com/PowerPlayChess and join the club. I should mention that the next live masterclass exclusively for patrons takes place on Friday the 24th of July. So patrons I'll be posting news on that very soon. Okay, back to the game. What did you come up with? Erdogmus found a very nice forcing sequence that gave him a crushing kingside attack. He played bishop takes knight. Now, if the bishop recaptures, then knight h5 forks queen and bishop and wins the material. Therefore, knight takes is forced. And now an exchange sack. Rook takes. Once again, bishop takes would allow knight h5. So queen takes and queen d3. So if you came up with that sequence, well done. This is absolutely crushing. So queen h7 mate threatened. And the problem is, of course, you can't close the diagonal because of knight takes bishop, pawn takes, and queen takes pawn, and mate. So the rook has to move to give the king some room. So a check, king moves to the side, and now, very nice follow-up. You don't check straight away, but you play knight f5. Covering e7 so that queen h8 mate is threatened. So the king has to keep moving. So king e8. Incidentally, there's nice variation here. If bishop takes knight, knight takes, queen h2 check here. In fact, these checks don't achieve anything. The rook can be taken, but it's mate, and if rook e8 check, then just king f3. Everything is fine for white. So king e8, knight takes g7 check, the king steps up, knight takes bishop, king takes, and the attack is just too much. Yeah, if the king shuffles across, then queen takes pawn, and you know there are too many threats here basically. King e7, rook e1 check, all the pieces are invited to the party. Yeah, if king d6, then queen f7 again. Queen e7 mate threat, knight e4 as well. So bishop e5 blocks the check. And now there's a winning move, rook e4. That just disturbs the queen, which was defending the bishop. A check. King h2. Queen hasn't got a good square to go to. Rook h8. That's an interesting one. So if queen takes rook, then queen takes rook here. And suddenly black is back in the game. But there's a simple win here, just forcing moves. Rook takes queen and rook e4, so that the rook is attacked and the bishop is attacked as well. Simple double attack, and black doesn't have a defense. I mean, if the rook moves, then this is a very, very simple winning endgame for white. Bishop and knight and a pawn against a rook. And the most important thing is the minor pieces are stable. They can't be pushed around. Rook g7 played, rook check, king f6, and now f4 covers the rook. The bishop is protected by the rook, and knight h5 mate is threatened. And at this point, Martinez had had enough and resigned the game. Of course, you can prevent mate, but in doing so, you'd have to give up. Rook for knight, and then white is just a piece up for nothing, and easy win for white. Well, that was a very convincing game. Interesting. It would be very interesting to know how much of that was preparation. I suspect that Erdogmus, as I said earlier, Erdogmus was sort of having to revisit these lines and think things through. But rook e4 was a great move, because that's kind of unorthodox. It looks funny, but it certainly tests black. and introduces amazing complications. There's just one other variation I wanted to show you. If we go back to this position, so here is where Martinez played rook d8 to give the king some room. He could have tried rook e8, and this is a little bit different. So check here. Now, if white plays as in the game with knight df5, now this one isn't so good because when that's taken, check here, and queen h1 is mate because instead of the rook on d8, the rook is on e8 covering e2. So in this position, white would have to play in a different way because the rook is on e8. But in fact, rook e1 is very strong. And in this case, knight f5 is the threat again because e7 is covered. And Erdogmus apparently had seen this and saw that this was still winning for white. Yeah, if g6, then in fact this move is very, very strong and black's position is getting taken apart. So just a little detail. Yeah, by the way, patrons, if you want to see more of Erdogmus's play, then do check out the latest extra puzzle videos because I featured Erdogmus's games there. And do take a look at the test game as well, which is a strategic masterpiece. Erdogmus plays absolutely superbly. A very different kind of chess to here, actually. There you go. So I'll give you an update on what's happening in Biel. But yeah, Erdogmus, after 4 draws, has won a classical. Let's just have a look at the standings. You can see Aronian is still out in front, but Erdogmus is just creeping up the table.